last year I had the honor of being the president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, which was the pinnacle of a long career. And I want to comment on something that Maureen said that I think is crucial for most of you in this room. She said she's just a bench worker. Nothing happens without bench workers. No analyses get done. No reports get written. No court testimony results. I can tell you, after having been in the laboratory for about 35 or 36 years, there were many times during my days as a manager I wished I was back just being a bench worker, because the satisfaction that comes from the experience of analyzing evidence and thinking about what's happening and thinking about bringing science and law together. I had a lot of those moments, again, when I was in management where I said, gee, I wish I was back on the bench as just a bench worker. So Maureen, thank you for your comments. I want to reiterate what Chuck said and thank Jocelyn, Margaret, Jose, the entire staff at NIJ, Kevin Lothridge, and the people from NSFTC for putting together this program. I've been a part of this, I think, for maybe 2 years, and every time I walk away from here, I say to myself, thank goodness for all of you, because you really care about what you're doing. One of the things that I'm going to ask you to think about this week is, or one of the experiences I hope you have, is one of those, why didn't I think of that moments? These symposia, I think, are intended to share information, but they should also be an opportunity for those of you who have some really interesting ideas about how we do what we do better to share it. And that word is overused. But to talk about what you're doing to make things better. I'm not going to talk about the report because I think it was a valuable document. But I think we're at a point where we should be thinking about what we need to do, again, to do our jobs better. We should be thinking about what we need to do to write better reports. We need to think about what we have to do to present the best quality work product possible in the courtroom. And the only way to do that, from my perspective, is by getting together in these kinds of symposia, these kinds of meetings, and talking to one another. You're going to learn more, I can guarantee you, from talking to one another outside of this room than you're probably going to learn from any of the sessions that we have in here. So again, talk to one another, talk about different ways to solve problems, think about different ways to address challenges. Here's how this session's going to work this afternoon. We have 4 distinguished speakers who will be talking about different areas of trace evidence. And they're going to be allowed up to about 7 minutes. And if the discussion is going quite well, they'll be allowed some more time. But again, we want to try to get as much discussion into this session as possible. After all of the speakers have had a chance to make their presentations, then I'll start off by asking some questions based on their presentations. And then we're going to open the floor to all of you with a caveat. For those of you who have ever watched me moderate these kinds of things before, I have this thing about the clock. And I want to allow as many people as possible an opportunity to ask questions, not to engage in a monologue. This is for questions. So if you choose to come up and you're invited to do it to one of the 2 microphones, you'll be allowed 60 seconds again to say whatever you'd like. Hopefully it'll be in the form of a question. But if it appears as though you are going off target, I will ask you, I will thank you, and we'll move on, have your comments addressed by a member of the panel, or have the next person afforded the opportunity again to talk about whatever they deem appropriate or ask one of the panel members as a question. So thank you again for following those ground rules. We'll begin this afternoon's session with Maureen Bottrell. Maureen's a geologist, as she mentioned, with the Trace Evidence Unit at the FBI. Maureen.
In preparation for this, Joe sent out a list of questions that he wanted us to consider as part of our remarks to you. And I'm going to be running through those and addressing some of those questions. And one of the first things that he asked us is, what do I think has changed within the last 3 years? And as he said, I am a geologist, and so I tend to think of things in those terms. And about 3 years ago was when the NAS report came out. And my experience is that kind of hit our field very much like an earthquake. We knew the fault lines existed. We knew the stresses were building, and we knew that at some point there was going to be a break, but we didn't quite know when. And when that earthquake finally hit us, it sent shock waves out into the community in all sorts of directions, and maybe some that we were somewhat unexpected ways. I think that as a whole, 3 years ago when that hit, the community looked at it, again, with shock and a little bit of resentment. Hey, I think I'm doing a fine job, and who are these people who are criticizing me for what I've done? Now, I think that is a very human tendency to look at things like that, where we have that little moment of awakening and we see things and we're resentful. We'd like for things to go on in the normal way, the way they always have, without having us having to disturb the status quo. But I think that as we reflected on some of the things that we said as a community, we realized that there was actually some good criticism in that report for the way that we handle things. We are dealing with the aftermath of that report and what it had caused us. And I think for the most part now, we're dealing with it fairly rationally. We're no longer going, hey, I think I do a good job. It's, hey, what can I do to make the job that I do even better than what we did before, so that never again can somebody stand up and give me this kind of criticism. Now, addressing these points is certainly not going to be a rapid process. But there's a lot of things that I think that are happening in the community now. One thing is we're going more towards method validation. I believe David will talk about that later in his remarks. We're also looking at things like standardization across the field. And one of the things I want to talk about with standardization is that why I think we all can agree that standardization is admirable and an obvious goal for all science. After all, this is pretty much the definition of science, that we can do the same thing and reproducibly end up with the same result. There's more to it than just that. We're also looking at the possibility of standardizing how we interpret things. And while I believe that the goal towards greater standardization is admirable, I'm not really sure that it's necessarily possible to do, especially in that area. I am up here, when I testify, I am up at the stand as an expert, and I am allowed to give my opinion. And my opinion, my definition, is my opinion. It's not necessarily standardizable. So I think we have to admit that that is a possibility. And if not, then there would never be any need for an opposing expert. We would all be able to get our information. We would all come to the same conclusions. We would all have the same interpretation. But that's not necessarily true, because we are basing some of this on our own personal experience, and we are giving our own opinion as to this thing. So I'm not really sure that standardization is absolutely possible through all disciplines of forensic science. Is there a comment? No. My opinion is my view, my judgment, and my appraisal formed about a particular matter. And it is my opinion. And other people may have different ones, so I'm not sure that that is possible to standardize. But what can we do to make this process better for the audience that we are actually addressing? The prosecutors, the defense, the jury, those people who are hearing our testimony and have to understand and form a judgment. Thank you. I think that the best thing that we can do, and here I'm speaking as the chairman of SWGMAT because we've certainly advocated this for quite a while, is we must be more transparent. And I am seeing that move afoot definitely in our area. We are becoming more transparent with what we do. We are providing more information with our reports. We are talking more about our methodology. We are explaining how our thought processes work. And I think that this is bringing us far along into making what we do more understandable and less like something that we have pulled out of the air. Because that's where the criticism came. They didn't understand what we were doing. And so they couldn't form their own judgment. If they understand, judgment will be more likely to fall to our favor. So we have to make sure that we are more transparent. Now, I think everybody needs to know, absolutely, the limits of what we can and can't say. And this is sometimes where we fall down. So we need to make sure that those are well communicated to everybody. And I'm seeing more of that being done as I'm seeing some of the changes in reporting. And it is also my responsibility to let people know that there could possibly be an alternate explanation for this evidence. I don't believe it's my task to come up with every possible alternate, but I do think we need to make sure that everybody knows that this is not the only explanation for most of our evidence. There are other possibilities. And again, I think we're improving in that area, but I think we still have a long way to go. Now, one of the last questions that I was asked is, do I think trace evidence exams might possibly be becoming extinct? And I have to say that I think that very possibly they are in their current incarnation. And this is because trace exams basically are very expensive. They use a lot of expensive equipment, and they require a lot of training of people in order for them to be done well. And in this day and age, there's definitely an assessment done of payoff versus cost. And it may end up being that we are somewhat more expensive. On the other hand, I think that there's always going to be a call for trace evidence. But I worry quite a bit in the community that we're going to lose some of our expertise because we are going to become less fully funded. So that is definitely a concern of mine. And that is pretty much my opening remarks. I think I've done.